I'd like to share with you my view of 5G as an enabler of the future. First, as an introduction of myself, my name is Craig Gibson. I started my career as a private investigator doing computer forensics, investigations, information security architecture, and strategy with the Network Security Investigation Agency, a startup I ran for a decade. I eventually worked my way into becoming the chief security architect of an international bank called Scotiabank, a similar role in Bell Canada, and eventually worked that into being a delegate, a United Nations delegate to the nation of China, specifically talking about information security intelligence sharing, blockchain, and other similar technologies, along with connected vehicles, drones, and agriculture. Through my research roles, I've worked with Europol as one of their first cyber telecom advisors, Interpol as the co-author of one of their purple notices on basically cybercrime, fusion between telecom and traditional IT security crime. And most recently, I've worked with the United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute on the criminal abuse of AI. This was a joint report with Trend Micro and Europol. Some of the most exciting things about 5G are the ideas that not only does it have the ability to provide more data, but the data itself has the ability to be much higher quality. Because it is higher quality, it can be used for relatively life-critical functions, things like operating cars at speed in the presence of other humans, the ability of drones to function not only near humans, but at altitude carrying heavy things that theoretically could fall on humans. Further, the idea of having very thoroughly coordinated vehicles, drones, robots, or other things that can operate not only safely around humans, but safely at speed around other versions of themselves. This fleet management and coordination of high-speed coordination of what could be very dangerous, very heavy vehicles or other robots or devices gives us the ability to have platooning and cellular vehicle to X. The idea that rather than build more roads, once we have autonomous vehicles on them only, you can simply increase the speed limit while reducing the space between the vehicles. If you double the speed limit and reduce the space by enough, you can quadruple the number of vehicles on a particular stretch of highway, if it's flat enough. These and similar synergies, optimizations, and efficiencies can be seen throughout 5G and its various use cases. To talk about 5G, we have to first talk about its targets and goals, the end point of its build path. So let's talk briefly about 6G. 6G is currently underway at a standards level. The business requirements and other things are being built right now and have gone through several rounds of review through the 6G flagship project through the University of Oulu in Finland. A number of use cases have been identified, some of which I'll talk mostly about during this presentation. Two of them are high mobility hotspots and autonomous mobility. High mobility hotspots are the idea that any kind of vehicle within the scope of 6G devices has the ability to function as basically a cell tower or a repeater of sorts. So you can have coverage from within a plane, coverage between planes, coverage from space to planes, and from planes to the ground, or trains, or cars, or robots, or cell phones. This edge mesh is a fascinating innovation with a number of security requirements, as you might understand. The other is autonomous mobility, the idea of cars not only being able to function with full autonomy, but the idea that they can work not only alone, but in coordination with others of their type. So connected vehicles driving on a highway can coordinate to make lane changes. Robots can move things from one hand to another and then hand them to yet another robot, and other things like drone swarms of a number of drones flying through the same airspace without collisions and more or less using what you could think of as an invisible highway in the sky. These have a variety of risks, obviously. Telecom is a technology just like IT, even though it's quite different in some ways. and it has its own risks. As I mentioned earlier, I worked with Europol and Trend Micro to create the first cyber telecom crime report, a number of telecom abuses of IT abuses of telecom, and brand new crimes that are not traditional to either. This is available for free on the internet. Let's talk about scalability, one of the main use cases. This particular diagram is not bound to any particular kind of metric. It's just meant to say that real traffic is dirty. Real human activities are very subject to very high peaks, low troughs, and lots of fluctuation. Written audit standards, however, don't take into account any of that. Written security standards, accounting standards, other engineering standards tend to be written, tend to be in books, tend to be non-dynamic, non-scalable, and non-programmatic. Once they're written, they're immediately obsolete and become more so over time. Those written documents are the top dashed line. Because security tends to operate in a very absolute kind of way, security and other kinds of risk tend to have this dashed line kind of security. Everything between it and the peaks and valleys below is wasted effort, wasted money, more security than you need, more risk than you need to address. 5G, however, through the reliance on 5G machine learning, or ML5G as it's also called, has the ability to recognize and optimize recursively what is happening in its network, not only to itself at a telecom level, but also at a tenant level. So the actual customers of 5G can have this analysis performed on their activities and their traffic so as to perform more and more optimized, more and more accurately provisioned traffic. So if you need 10 of something, you might be given 11, but not 100. If you're given 10 of something and if you're given 11 of something and you needed 10, you may pay for 11, but not 100. This has a variety of benefits, not only in finance, but in reduced CapEx for network build-out, reduced OpEx for actually performing various functions within 5G, and the ability to actually perform things that would not be profitable otherwise, or would not be practical otherwise for financial, logistic, or practical reasons, like even hiring people to actually physically do it. Another way of visualizing that is to say that 4G is very complex, very manual, very human-based, and requires continuous maintenance and tuning to keep it going. 5G, on the other hand, is a series of nested clouds, each of which multiply the effects of the one nearest. So machine learning clouds, machine language function orchestrators, or MLFOs, receive the data coming from the very high quality, very data-rich 5G network and create very accurate models for how to be more effective and cheaper, more optimized. They push those improved models down into the data cloud, requiring less data to be just as effective. Data is expensive and has a lot of liability. You want to store and manage as little as possible. It has its own CapEx. When you have reduced data, you require less information technology. When you have less information technology, you can manage each of the lower levels of cloud far more effectively using less CapEx, less resources, and less staff. This allows you to be more dynamic, have less overhead, and generally be more effective. You can accomplish more with less in 5G. Autonomy in drones. The standards body called 5G Car has identified 5 use cases. These apply not only to cars, but to flying drones, naval drones, and others. So cooperative maneuvering. It's the concept that if you want to make a lane change, you'll coordinate with other vehicles who will either speed up if they're ahead, slow down if they're behind, to give you the space to get in if you are an autonomous vehicle. Cooperative perception. If a vehicle ahead of you identifies that there's a car impact or a traffic accident, it will tell you as an autonomous vehicle to slow down. Cooperative perception can extend in other ways and even more than one vehicle ahead. Cooperative safety, certainly, if each of the autonomous vehicles is in effect motivated at a design level to not have someone drive into them, all of the cars in the area will cooperate across their entire area to avoid having any car pileups, collisions, or other things. So that cooperative safety is something that can spread at the speed of radio through a particular slowdown or a particular chunk of highway. When you have the first three, the fourth, autonomous navigation, is much easier. If you identify at an autonomous vehicle level that there is something ahead of you that is going to increase the amount of time it takes you to arrive at your destination, well, you can just take the car exit. You can pull over and do your other delivery earlier. You can make all of these time-saving and optimized decisions that allow an autonomous vehicle to return its investment more quickly. And finally, if you have autonomous navigation, you can get into remote driving. And remote driving is the idea that perhaps you are a human at a distance commanding one or many autonomous vehicles to perform a variety of tasks. Perhaps you are functioning as a dispatcher, sending many vehicles out to do various things. Perhaps you are functioning as a tech support for various ride-sharing functions, or perhaps you're actually manually managing an individual forklift in a relatively dangerous place, for instance. When you're managing a number of vehicles, be they land vehicles or flying vehicles, you have what's called fleet management. Fleet management can be very intimate, or it can be very delegated. You can tell a number of vehicles to go from point A to point Z, or you can actually interface directly with a single set of vehicles and configure them to do very specific tasks in a very individualized way, subject to relatively immediate conditions. The GSMA is the global trade federation for all of the different carriers in the world, all the phone companies in the world, and all the 5G providers in the world. They produce not only standards, but they send and receive very specific telecom data to each other for security purposes, optimization, and strategy purposes. But they also create standards, in this case, for the management of unmanned aircraft traffic, basically air traffic control for drones using 5G. At the same time, car or land vehicle traffic is also subject to GSMA 5G standards. And the fleet management for either can be federated or harmonized with each other so as to allow flying drones to coordinate and land on moving ground vehicles. They would do this for enhanced perception, perhaps to send and receive various kinds of information, or perhaps even to deliver and drop off various kinds of shipments or parcels, even when a vehicle is moving or otherwise stuck in traffic. As you can imagine, anytime you have systems talking to each other, there's a variety of risks that go with those. And the picture in the top right corner is an example of a kind of business logic or business process compromise. Connected vehicles are required as some of their business rules to obey laws, including traffic laws. So for instance, a connected vehicle may have the ability to drive across a dashed line, but not have the ability to cross a solid line. As you can see in the top right picture, these are traffic lines that would normally be going down the middle of a highway. But by drawing them in a circle, an autonomous vehicle can drive into the circle, but not out of the circle. In effect, it's trapped. A large trap like this placed in a convenient spot may function as flypaper for connected vehicles. There is a piece of research I've written jointly with David Sancho and Dr. Vincenzo Ciaglini through Trend Micro, which is called The Criminal Abuse of AI. There's a number of articles and use cases specific to these kinds of things, and that paper will come out later this month. Connected cars and connected skies is also a GSMA initiative. Law enforcement, public safety, ambulances, and fire control have all deeply embraced the concept of drones for doing things like search and rescue, for flying a drone carrying a fire hose up to the 15th floor of a building and putting out a fire through by shooting fire retardant through the window, and a variety of other relatively detailed use cases. This adoption has been wholehearted, and often proofs of concept are deployed almost immediately, since even a proof of concept device may be capable of saving lives. Autonomous fleet management is another topic that has a lot of fascinating features to it. So when you have, for instance, Teslas or other autonomous vehicles, you can capitalize on the fact that they remain unused for about 95% of their time. They take their owner to and from work or to and from home about 5% of the time and spend the rest of it doing nothing. However, through the application of fleet management, 5G and others, cellular vehicle-to-X technologies, they can roam around functioning as a taxi and basically try to recover their own cost by doing pickups and drop-offs throughout the day. In addition, there's other use cases like what happens when an autonomous vehicle runs out of charge as it's driving. Well, there's drones that can then fly up to the autonomous vehicle and recharge that autonomous vehicle without you ever leaving your office. There are complications. As you can see from the red wagon in the bottom corner, the artist Simon Weckert performed a piece of art in which he made a very interesting point. By taking 99 fully activated Google phones down a very deserted German street, Google Maps believed that there were 99 cars moving slowly, which is a high traffic condition. Google Maps believed that to be gridlock. It then redirected real-world actual cars away from that area, causing true real-world gridlock on another bridge. So as you can see, these sort of business process compromises and other things do have a real-world impact. The police vehicle in the top center is a prototype police interceptor with the ability to kill COVID virus by increasing its internal temperature to 54 degrees Celsius for 14 hours at a time. As you can imagine, if it were misconfigured or hacked, if someone is handcuffed in the back seat and the interior is 54 degrees Celsius, it would have a health impact. And finally, the picture in the bottom center indicates there's still quite a bit of work to be done, hopefully by new startups, on how to do things like sell a connected or autonomous vehicle. When a vehicle is sold, there's the vehicle and the subscription that makes it a connected or autonomous vehicle. When you sell something out of your fleet, you only sell the vehicle, you don't sell the connectivity. So how does somebody actually sell a connected vehicle? That's still being worked out. And if you sell a connected vehicle and it ceases to be connected a month or two later because the original owner has not paid for that connectivity, that subscription, perhaps the vehicle suddenly comes to a stop in the middle of the highway in winter or in the middle of a forest or somewhere less safe. Fleet management and air traffic control work in similar ways. In effect, there's a traffic safety server that receives telemetry or remote information from various radios, which could be 5G cellular radios. And it's also coordinated with things like image recognition from traffic cameras. If there is a collision, it will not only warn other vehicles that are traveling in that area that the amount of time it takes to get to work will be longer, and therefore they should take another path, but it also does things like identify whether or not a pedestrian carrying a phone, perhaps a 5G phone, is on a crosswalk, and therefore the connected vehicle should take special care, even though it may not be able to see around that corner. All of these functions are effectively the same for air traffic control and 5G drones. Some of these security and other concepts are part of research that I released recently with Newman Huck and Rainer Vossler in a free report called Driving Security into Connected Cars. Talking about 5G and its way to 6G, There's a few common global trends. One is national identity. So China has proof of concepts in place right now with tens of thousands of people in which eSIMs or 5G era SIMs, subscriber identity modules, SIM cards, are used to function as basically the equivalent of a wallet. In the effort of China to become a cashless society, the concept that someone's identity, their identity cards, their passport, their bank accounts, and also their ability to open perhaps their house and other things, the concept that all of that is bundled into a single eSIM means that various reputation scores can be assigned to that eSIM. So if someone has been identified by the national government of China to be a bad person, they may perhaps not be able to buy train tickets, may not be able to buy plane tickets, may not be able to have certain jobs, may be fired from their current job, and may not even be able to access their own bank account if, for instance, they have had their assets seized. All of this would be the equivalent of simply canceling or modifying their SIM so as to no longer grant access to their life. Various first world countries are adopting this approach, and I'm watching them closely. Other global trends are the smart grid. So the smart grid is an interesting concept in which billions of IoT, Internet of Things devices, which are all SIM or eSIM based devices, use quite a lot of data. The things that those IoT devices are in charge of, which may include high energy demand devices like houses, air conditioners, cars, and other things, consume a lot of electricity. They consume it not only by simply being 5G devices, but also in their native function of being an air conditioner or car. Those SIMs manage the devices, and therefore they manage the power grid demand that those devices create. So if the power grid and power utilities want to know what their demand will be, they need to effectively ask the phone company. While SIM cards, because they're billing cards, they're responsible for initiating the billing on those devices. Because they're billing cards, and in effect, that billing is now in control of both telecom and electrical utility, that's called a banking telecom power federation. So those IoT SIM cards are in effect in control of banking and telecom and electricity, three different, typically separate kinds of critical infrastructure that are brought under one umbrella of the smart grid. This dynamic smart grid has then the ability to change and adapt to predicted demand. So if everyone is coming home from work for the day and they all drive electric cars, that smart grid will know that that house has an electric car, and they will probably need to recharge that car around 5 or 6 p.m. when they get home. That level of detail comes from the telecom side, but it's executed at the power grid side and paid for via banking. As you can imagine from the theme of this presentation, there are some vulnerabilities that go with that. So anytime you have the microservices that go into a 5G dynamic software-defined network, you also have vendors who are providing those microservices, and those microservices are attached end-to-end in service chains. So what that is not only a sequence of chains, but every chain has its own chain hanging from it. And all of the chains, as they mesh together in something called a service mesh, are all as vulnerable as the weakest link in all three of these dimensions of microservices, supply chain, and quality of service. Zero trust is the idea that every link in every chain has to be treated as if it might be the weakest link. Everything needs to be thoroughly authenticated at all times, vetted, and treated as if it may be potentially an enemy. Zero trust is a mechanism of enforcing security through every link as if it may be the weakest link. One of the more expensive ways of implementing security, as I mentioned earlier, is to blindly follow regulation and standard. If, however, you follow regulation and standard in a very accurate, defined way, its costs will be very low. And at that point, you can implement things like zero trust in a very shareholder-friendly way. So some of the more expensive kinds of data management, 5G being a data-centric network, are privacy and data sovereignty, wiretap, and money laundering. Wiretap is access to unencrypted telecom data. Privacy, wiretap, and money laundering, anti-money laundering, are enabled by different kinds of consent. So if you have a connected car, for instance, that functions under the privacy laws of the USA, and it crosses the border into Canada, it will now have to function under a very different set of data security and privacy rules. Any kind of connected vehicle which has the ability to cross borders must have this ability to dynamically change its security at a governance level and an implementation level, dynamically and on the fly, perhaps several times a day if it's going back and forth across various borders or customer conditions. So this consent inventory identifies what kind of consent and what kind of legislation is active at what time, at what place, and what those effects may be. That's then pushed down into a unified body called the Cyber Telecom Federation, which is IT telemetry and security and telecoms telemetry and security brought together in a harmonized way. So data types like date mean the same thing across all the various systems. The other thing is that machine learning has to be used to identify non-English PII, or personally identifiable information. By handling it in this way, a security breach is not necessarily a privacy breach. And if the security breach is minor, you may not have to report it to your various government agencies because it doesn't qualify as privacy, or because you have consent for managing it in a particular way. When you have Cyber Telecom Federation, you can assign various privileges and rights and accesses using zero trust architecture, which was recently dropped as a standard by NIST, the National Institute of Security Technology. By having Cyber Telecom Federation and zero trust, you have a thorough knowledge of what is a good behavior and the flip side of a thorough knowledge of what is a bad behavior. This is rock solid certainty that comes from 5G data, gives you the ability to have thoroughly secure products, very dynamic products, and perform very deep, very high profitability, very lucrative data mining on your customers' IoT devices and various other 5G machines. Thank you very much. I've been Craig Gibson, speaking on behalf of the forward-looking threat research team within Trend Micro and representing Trend Forward Capital and Trend Micro Research.